Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Vivian Onano. I'm a youth advisor to the Global Education Monitoring Report UNESCO, and I'm a Concordia Africa advisor. I'm excited to have you today to our session on investing in youth employment and entrepreneurship. So I'll take 30 seconds each, just go around the table, each introduce yourself in one line. And then the instruction is, until you're ready to speak, please don't turn on your mic. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aitemi Popo, and I'm an entrepreneur focused on building capacity in women across Africa and the diaspora. And I do this through ventures in media, technology, and tourism.
Good afternoon. My name is Eddie Mandry, and I serve as Director for Africa at Yale University, supporting the University President's Africa Initiative. My deep passion is around the question of education and strengthening educational systems around the continent. I'm originally from Kenya, and we have various activities across the pipeline of different ages to address talent and progress and prosperity for youth. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is James Mwangi. I'm Executive Director of the Dalberg Group. We're a collection of impact-oriented businesses spanning strategy consulting, design, data analytics, research, and implementation, working around the world to promote inclusive and sustainable growth. Africa is a primary hub for us. I am based in Kenya, which is home, and really the biggest hub of the work that Dalberg does. And increasingly, our work is moving from purely responsive client service to structuring or helping structure and develop large multi-sectoral partnerships to attack complex challenges in Africa and other parts of the developing world.
My name is Kennedy Odede from Kenya, and I work with Sharing of Communities, SHOFCO. We work with young people and the communities that are really neglected. So we work in informal settlement in Kenya. So right now we work in almost 9 slums, try to bring them together and looking for private sector and government on how these people who have been neglected can also have a voice. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Grant Harris. I was President Obama's Senior Director for Africa in the White House and launched initiatives such as the Young African Leaders Initiative. And now I have a consultancy that helps organizations and companies do work across Africa in terms of their strategy and navigating policy and political risk.
Morning, everyone. My name is Joy Zawadi, and I work with Akili Dada, a girls' and women's rights organization in Kenya. I am passionate about women in leadership, and I'm actually here just to share our perspectives on that. And I'm also a storyteller, so I look forward to that.
Morning, everyone. My name is Luanda Zingitwa. I'm South African. Banker by profession and training, but right now my portfolio spans across the public utility space as well as on the private side with the CEO initiative in South Africa, where we're looking at projects around SME development and funding as well as youth employment services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Funlola Odukoya. Feel free to call me Fun. I'm co-founder and Africa advisor here at the Africa Initiative of Concordia, as well as impact investor for the McKnight family out of the McKnight Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Dunnett. I direct the Vodafone Foundation, which is a philanthropic arm of Vodafone Group. Operates in about 27 countries around the world, particularly in Kenya, South Africa, Vodacom, Safaricom. We invest about 50 million sterling, plus a huge amount of technological support wherever we operate.
My name is Kakenya Ntaya, and I'm from Kenya. And I work with, I'm the founder of Kakenya's Dream, which is a non-governmental organization that's focusing on investing in girls and women in rural communities. I'm here to share our work and just to bring the voice of rural, which is the biggest population in most of the countries. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Chico Madi. I'm one of the founding partners at TipHub. TipHub is a VC-focused impact organization that invests in companies at the intersection of technology and impact. We work with early stage companies and help them think about their business models, think about what impact means to them, and what scale looks like. and we've been working on Tip Hub for the last 5 years, and we've transitioned away from being more of an accelerator, and now we're actually making direct investments. That's kind of our journey right now. Looking forward to discussing more about what's in the future for Tip Hub and how we can contribute to this to the challenge of youth employment and entrepreneurship.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jake Obeng Bediako, and I am the Youth Ambassador for Diaspora Affairs at the Office of the President of Ghana. My passion overall in life really is to shape the global perception of Africa and the African, and I'm doing that currently through Diaspora Affairs and linking the diaspora Ghanaians and Africans with their local counterparts and seeing how possibly we can really harness the human resource that Africa has working for its future. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mr. Tane Jack Rich. I'm a Nigerian. I'm in the oil and gas business. I am pretty much interested in connecting youths to build the right ecosystems to develop their dreams, achieve their aspirations, and making sure that they become the most important economic vibration that Africa needs, and to set Africa at the center stage of the world to making Africans proud. Because I believe strongly that irrespective of contacts, connections, and affluence all over the world, even if you're a friend of the President of the United States or the UK Prime Minister and all that, if you as an African, you're unable to convert your intellects and your well-being into making Africa a better place, your value outside Africa is valueless. So I'm very happy to be here, and I look forward to this section creating the needed enabler to making Africa a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Noela Kosaris Musunka. I'm the founder of Malaika, a set up the foundation 12 years ago. I believe in transforming in rural villages through education and health infrastructure. We're developing a village with an ecosystem where we have a school that empowers 340 students, a community center that offers 5,000 people different programs, and around the village we do water sanitation for more than 35,000 people, and we grow our own food that it go to the canteen of the school. So the ecosystem that we created can be a model that can be duplicated anywhere else in Africa and in the world for communities and girls' leadership education.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introductions. If you're listening keenly during the introduction, you've heard the buzzwords: impact, scale, diaspora, data, SMEs, education system, investment, enabling environment, transformation. So, and that's what this session is all about. We're investing in young people and creating employment, and it's a major crisis right now, so we cannot continue going on with business as usual. And just to delve into our conversation, so it's going to be very interactive. I'm expecting contribution from the audience too. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. If you have a contribution, you can raise your hand. It's a very interactive discussion. So I'll go straight to our panelists. James, to start with you, you've been working a lot with Dalberg on education for employment and mass entrepreneurship as a driver for mass employment. Do you mind please sharing about your work, what is working or what could potentially work, and how we can drive partnerships around that too?
Thank you, Vivian. It's a massive question, so you will have to be very ruthless to stop me when I've been going on for too long. But I'll do my best. But feel free to cut in. So we've been looking at the question of youth employment or youth livelihoods from a range of angles for the last few years, and particularly in a new partnership we've entered into around the MasterCard Foundation's Young Africa Works program. One of the critical things that has emerged across all of the pieces of work that we've been doing is just how little underlying data informs our thinking on what youth unemployment is about. And so when we tried to actually really dig into what was happening and use some of the tools and some of the knowledge that currently exists, we realized a few things. So for example, while Kenya's formal unemployment rate, like many African countries, is in the low single digits or mid-teens, depending on which data set you're looking at, everyone knows that's not the reality. And it reflects the fact that in a country without social protections, you have to be doing something if you're staying alive. If you zero in on underemployment, in other words, young people who say that they have something that they do and will show up in the statistics as having employment, and you then ask among the underemployed, what is the average rate? So one, the vast majority of Kenyans are underemployed. Two, among the underemployed, the average amount of income earned in the last month reported was 0, the median amount. And so when you're underemployed, it means that you have a hustle that you point to. I am a tailor, I am a carpenter, I do this or that. It gives you dignity, it gives you a sense of purpose, but very often it gives you very little, if any, income. And so zeroing in on that point is the first thing. Understand the needs of the underemployed, because actually, the other interesting thing we found is that the people who show up in many, South Africa being an interesting exception because there is a social protection ecosystem, but the people who show up as unemployed in most African countries' statistics are actually slightly privileged. They can afford to be unemployed because their parents or family members are working, and they can show up in the statistics as still searching or still looking for work. The truly disadvantaged are underemployed. In other words, they're doing something, usually in the informal sector, but it pays way too little for them to live a dignified life. The second thing to observe is very often we focus on, well, we need to bring in foreign investment and this and that to encourage the growth of the formal sector in Africa. That is important, no doubt. But again, in most African countries, the formal sector accounts for less than 20% of economic activity. More importantly, the informal sector is growing faster than the formal sector even today. And so what we need to be asking ourselves, yes, let's think about how we grow the formal sector and so on and so forth, but how do we create dignified work in the informal sector? Particularly because if you look at the future of work and what's already happening in places like the United States, how many people have moved from having a formal office job to being in the informal sector, running an Airbnb, driving an Uber, occasionally selling their services on TaskRabbit? In a sense, Africa is already there. And so when we think about how we tackle unemployment or how we tackle livelihoods, A, underemployment, B, rethink how we think about informality, and C, it's about the gender, stupid, in the sense that underemployment, unemployment, however you slice it, is most heavily concentrated among young women. And yet we know that incomes for young women are most quickly translated into either ongoing investment in growing ventures or benefits of social benefits. So you look at those three things and you ask what kind of programs and what kind of interventions could succeed, and that then triggers a whole other conversation. But as I said before, I could go on for a while, so I'll pause there. Feel free to direct me in a different direction or dig in deeper if that's interesting.
Thank you so much, James. You've raised some key points on data. I think it's an ongoing conversation right now on reliable access to reliable data, open and reliable data, sorry, and then dignified work and how we can improve the informal sector because most of the people are in the informal sector. And you also touched on the gender inequality among underemployed youth. So I'll go to Noella. Noella, your work in Congo is really focused on girls' education, and also you're working with communities to empower them, and your focus is on women. So how do you make sure that the young girls who transition from the program have the skills to be able to transition to proper employment or be entrepreneurs and be able to live dignified lives?
Thank you, Viviane. Our school is an evolutive school. So the students start at 5 years old and they finish at 18 years old. So the older now, right now, they are 13 years old. Mm-hmm. So we still have 4 years before putting them into the workforce, or if they want to do a university or technical school. What is very important in the history of the Congo, it's very important to invest in quality education, training the teachers, upgrading the curriculum, and offering a holistic curriculum where you're adapting what we're teaching them with technologies. And we're working in a rural village where there's no water, no electricity, no infrastructure. So it's really to push the government that they need to invest in rural villages. They need to give a chance to the education, not only to the girls, but to the communities. Because when we built the school, we noticed that we cannot only teach the student and the girls, it was very important to teach their parents, their brothers, their sisters, and at the community community center, we're offering multitask skills where they can learn to work with wood. And what is very key is really to push them to not drop into secondary school, because what we're seeing is that 15% in the Congo, when they're arriving at secondary school, the girls are dropping. So we want Frida, Lauriane, Louise to have dreams to become scientists or engineer, but to really fulfill the gap that is missing to have a key role woman in the Congo. And the education that we're offering is free. And when you work in a village where the student eats maybe only twice a week, it was very important to offer them a nutrition programs. So when they arrive at a school, they have breakfast and they have lunch.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Noella, for your contribution. I'll turn back to Eddie. There's a lot of conversation around the mismatch between what kids learn in school and what the labor market requires. And I know your key area is on strengthening education system. So what do you think we need to do that we're not getting right, and who needs to do it?
Thank you. That's a great question. I mean, I think as an African and many people on this table who are from the continent, there's a glaring challenge with the educational systems and what they're doing to prepare young Africans for careers or the world of work or entrepreneurship, or working for themselves. And the underinvestment in education has to be something that's addressed. We're really not dodging the conversation. We're misdirecting the conversation when we sometimes tend to let universities off the hook. Our academic institutions, the strategies they pursue, in what alignment are they with regard to the development priorities of the countries, and how are they preparing our young people to be citizens of the 21st century who have skills just beyond, skills well beyond being able to memorize and study for a test. 21st century skills, critical thinking, analysis, public speaking, these are all really important and integral. Digital skills, really integral components of education. And there are innovators in these spaces. You see the African Leadership University trying to break the mold and do creative things in the education space. Ashesi University in Ghana, Patrick Awa, obviously bringing liberal arts education model to the African continent. So there are examples of people taking this problem by the horns and trying to transform it. The other issue I think that's important also to address is the fact that, similar to what Noella was mentioning, is that about 70% of young Africans are living in rural communities. They're rapidly urbanizing, moving to cities for opportunity, but most of them are involved in agriculture. And how can agriculture be one of those sectors that can create opportunities for young agricultural entrepreneurs?
Just following up on what Eddie said, if I could just interject, Eddie, you're definitely right about agriculture being the #1 focus for youth employment. But I think, and I mentioned this yesterday on the roundtable, that if we don't focus first or concurrently, however you want to describe it, on climate, then we can't really solve the youth entrepreneurship problem, because in agriculture, you're going to see the largest sort of changes because of climate. So if we're using agriculture as a way for these young, these youth to be employed, and we're not solving the climate crisis, then they have no option in the agricultural space, and they will continue to have this urbanization problem that will exacerbate country resources. So.
Thank you, Funala, for the contribution. So there's a lot of conversation around rural youth, and I'll turn to Kakenya. You work with really marginalized young people. I think among all of us, you're really in the mashinani, as we call it in Swahili. So I'd love to hear about your work, how you're making sure that you change the mindset of these young people, right? Because most of the time they feel forgotten by the system. So how do you rekindle hope among these young people and also prepare them for life, to be able to be competitive in the labor market, not only in the villages where they're coming from, because you're preparing them to be global citizens. So not only in the villages that they're coming from, but nationwide and even at the global level.
So much, Viviana. I think Noella and Eddie have mentioned quite a bit of the issues that are affecting young people. So we run a school, but we started in 4th grade, and for us it was an intervention to end some of the social norms that prevent women and girls from female genital cutting to early forced marriages, and intervening in a point where the society is telling them now you are going to be a wife, but we take them to the school and tell them you have dreams and you can achieve what you want to achieve in life. We've been working in this for 10 years, so when we take students, it's not just a scholarship for 1 year, or we look at it holistically, because that's what we failed mostly in Africans. The solutions we come with, it's one thing, free education, let's put them in school, but we've not looked at the teacher quality, we've not looked at, so I've grown with my students, and over the stages, I realized when they finish class 8, in Kenya we have big exams, and which really where inequality starts, because if you don't have a quality education, you're not going to pass that exams, and all of a sudden, you are told those who do well, they go to the best, high schools, and then those who go to the rural schools, you've already started to divide. And so you go to the rural school, they don't have good teachers or resources. I mean, we are talking in Kenya, the whole idea of IT inclusion in the schools, but it's just a buzzword. But in rural school, there are no computers in the classrooms. There is no electricity. There is nothing in there. So you're really left out. And when they finish secondary school, then they have to apply to go to university, but within the secondary school system, there is no career counseling. There is no opening spaces for creativity. You are just told you pass the exam and then go to university. And sometimes we are not even aligning their passion, which I find very difficult in Kenya. They choose for you your career. If you're really done very well, you become the doctor. But suppose my passion and my real interest is not being a doctor. So you have to get out of that government system to find a way. So I think the whole system, the way it is built to keep the status quo. If you're in poverty, you remain in poverty. And if you are going to strike out, they're very amazing, great organizations, Shofko, Noella, we are doing all we can, but we continue every level we get. There are challenges, and it's really, and I look forward to later on figuring out how do I keep doing what I'm doing well, and how do I tap into that system that's already helping me build so that I can launch the students to the net. So I'm grateful that one of the things we've done in high school is really mentorship, connecting the students to the leaders who are already in the business sector or whatever career you like. So we will, if you want to be an engineer, we will link you with a woman who is doing engineer so that you can start seeing, does it align with my passion? So that from the time you finish high school, you're getting into what you're already interested in. And that does not exist in many. I mean, if we don't exist, those kids will still be in the villages. We've seen 100% transition from one grade to another, and our girls now are in university, and my biggest worry now is, do they get jobs? And do they get jobs? And that's now I'm like thinking, what do I do to really launch them? Because that's the critical point so that they can fly and they can be who they want to be. I have managed to avoid, make them avoid social norms. They have not been married. They have not gone through FGM. Now, one piece, will they get jobs?
That's a very good question.
Great place to
I wasn't thinking. I didn't know what to say.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. Okay, Chiga. First of all, thank you so much for painting the full picture of trying to empower a young person in a rural area with all the difficulties, the social constraints that are there, but also trying to give them hope. Because for me, I think coming from such a place, the first thing that you need before you even talk about employment and anything else is hope and believing in yourself and somebody telling you that you can do it. And that's exactly what you're doing. So thank you so much for your work. Kennedy Odede, based on the statistics that James shared with us, right, majority of the young people that you're working with are either underemployed or unemployed. So with the work that Shofko is doing, how are you able to help these young people create meaningful employment or be able to start their own ventures that can thrive?
Thank you so much, Vivian. I just feel like there's a lot of talks, in the world, but we know the solution. the problems will be solved on the grassroots level. As someone who grew up in a slum, for example, Vivian, you see in Kenya, for example, right now, 60% of the population live in informal settlement in places like the slums. And you rarely see programs that are really going to empower these people. The first question is that, what are the missing gap? I'll give you a quick example is that a young man or a young woman from Kibera slum under the age of 25 looking for a job. They don't understand how to dress up for that. What the timing there? They are shy. And yet there's a lot of billions of money going on for youth employability. You know what I mean? The solution is to go down. SHOFCO is a platform, I'll be honest with you. We are the largest organization in Kibera, and I think in Kenya for community organization. And we work with these people, young people, trying to empower them by training them, preparing them for what is outside there. I think if we can do that, is the best way to start. Going to the communities and finding how do we empower these young people. Are they ready for the job market? So I was really proud 2 weeks ago when I went to a Java shop. It's a coffee chain in Kenya. And one of the waiters was from Kibera through our program. I said, can I talk to the manager? Who came? And he said, Kennedy, I want more of this Agnes in my company. You see? So as we train them, we are telling them, listen, you're going there as our ambassador. People talk so bad about slums, people from, criminals people, all those things. So when you go there, be our ambassador. And through that link, we are able to work with Safaricom and other companies by being us in community, being able to be a way to train these young people and make them be ready. Because we know them, we know their characters, and be a good example. If you don't invest in that, I think we'll be doing a zero work.
So have you had partners to work with on that?
Yes. So right now in Kenya, we work with hotels, a couple of hotels, and we also work with the Java. We have given, I think, for our last, we have trained almost over 5,000 young people, and 80% of them have gotten jobs. Something else, we are also, you know what? We are also to say this. Poverty for me is making you invisible. We have a lot of talent in these communities. So what we are doing now, we have the best carpenters, we have the best, So what we do as SHOFCO, we become the bridge. So right now, I know some of our middle-class Kenyans and those rich Kenyans who are using artists, the people who can come to their houses and help them from Kibera. Before that, they have this mentality that people from the slums, they're going to steal their things. We're like, no. We're going to be here to assure you. We're going to be assured we're going to give you good people. So we have a lot of skills labor that are also coming from Kibera and other slums that are now really, we are able to help them to qualify on their job.
Thank you so much for that example. And I'm glad that we've already created 5,000 jobs. And you also touched on the importance of vocational training for employment creation for young people. So I'll turn to you, Luanda. You work with young entrepreneurs, and you've been in the banking industry on financing young entrepreneurs, and now you also focused on the training of young entrepreneurs. So through your program, what are some of the challenges that you face, but also how many young people have been able to successfully go through your program, start their ventures, and are now thriving?
Thanks, Vivian. Just before I answer the question, I think it's probably important to make the comment that this conversation is not only critical, but it's quite urgent, and the solutions coming out of it are even more urgent. If you look at the events in South Africa over the last couple of weeks, that should tell all of us that this is a ticking time bomb. If we don't find solutions that are of greater scale, we have a very big problem on our hands. And I guess, some of the programs that we've been involved in are quite small on the face of it, but what we've done is we've looked at employment and entrepreneurship in two sort of separate streams. On the employment side, we've looked at graduates who are unemployable in a sense, either because the skills that they have don't match what's needed by industry. And we've said as part of the CEO initiative, take all of the top 80 listed companies in Johannesburg and provide about 1 million jobs in the space of 5 years. And essentially how the program would work is you would take on somebody for over a year, train them, make sure that they're ready for the world of work and hopefully be able to absorb a portion of those, or they can go into their own businesses. The second part of that on the entrepreneurship side has been the establishment of an SME fund. And essentially that fund has looked at not only funding the businesses, which is obviously a big problem, but also giving small businesses access to market through the bigger corporates that are shareholders in the fund. Training them, giving them access to supply chain, making sure that they understand what it is that is required for a business to attract investment, but also to scale up. And that's essentially what we've been trying to do. And I guess from a continuity perspective, what we would be wanting to see is more multinationals and other corporates getting involved in those types of programs. Currently, we've got about 1.5 billion invested in funds, and that's about to run out. So it just shows you just how much there is a need for funding that is not provided for in the normal banking circles.
Thank you. Back to you. You talk about bringing the private sector into the work that you're doing. What are some of the challenges, and how do you buy in the private sector? Because there has to be an incentive, right? Because for the private sector, it's no longer charity. It's a win-win situation. So how do you have those conversations?
Look, I think it's taken a long enough time. Let's start there. But I think corporates in South Africa, at least, are starting to see that if you don't solve the social issues, even the businesses are going to start to take a knock. So growth is suffering. So your businesses are not going to make the returns that you need for shareholders. So part of the discussion has been to say, how do you make it call it a lucrative solution for businesses. And what we've done in the South African context is to make sure that there are incentives and businesses do get something back for what they invest into the community. So if we look at our own legislation, we've got empowerment initiatives that if you as a business contribute into a program of that nature, you are then able to get access to businesses that you wouldn't otherwise have exposure to in the public space procurement. So those are just some of the incentives that are there. And really the conversation has been to say it's a give and take. So to bring business on board, business also needs to feel like the government and labor are also coming to the table and there's something that they're bringing to the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Vivian, if I could interject on that. To piggyback on what you've said, I think another thing that at TipHub that we've realized being in the private sector and working with private sector stakeholders is that some of the, it's not necessarily a win-win conversation. I think it's more about driving the idea that purpose and profit aren't at odds, and being able to create a value proposition similar to what you've mentioned around how both sides can benefit. Some of the ways that we've worked with private sector, with investors that have come in on co-investments that we've done, there's been skills transfer. So for example, we have a healthcare company in Tanzania that works with a Maryland-based healthcare contracting company in the United States. And they went in on an investment with us, and there's a lot of skills exchange and experience that goes on between both companies, and that's super beneficial to both companies, particularly the Maryland company that's looking for growth opportunities globally, right? Because we know for a fact that in the next 5 to 10 years, next 20 years, growth profiles are going to look different in different regions now than they do now, and being able to figure out growth opportunities in Africa is a huge way to get ahead of the competition. So that's one way. Another way that we see to create more value for companies, create more value for the private sector, is to help them also figure out, help them solve a problem, right? So entrepreneurs are good at entrepreneuring, right? They're gonna if you give them the opportunity, the resources, the capabilities, they'll figure things out. Big, large companies are big, and they've gotten really big from creating value over time. Sometimes one of the key challenges for big companies is solving problems quickly. What we find is that there are a lot of entrepreneurs, if they had access to those problems, they could solve those problems, right? And so what we try to do, what we've tried to do is create a bridge between those problem solvers and the corporates that are looking for solutions. And so what ends up happening is that business challenges get solved at a fraction of what it would cost to pay a consulting group. Sorry, Dalbert. At a fraction of what it would cost to pay a consulting group. And so oftentimes, those kind of value propositions help incentivize companies and incentivize the private sector to jump into supporting and working with entrepreneurs, be it socially or from a strictly investment transaction perspective.
Thank you so much, Chika, for that invaluable contribution. I'll turn to you, Tane, because you've been both in the private sector and from Personal Foundation, working on investing in young people. So do you mind please sharing about your work and how you go about on skills training for young people in the education sector?
All right, thanks a lot. Well, basically what I would say is that we need to build the right ecosystem. It's very important. If you want to develop a strategy to change the narratives of how our young Africans live, you got to build the right ecosystem. And again, we need to recognize that we're talking about a population of about 1.316 billion. 65% of that population are young youths. And that's about over, I took the number down, that's over 769 million. That's what we're talking about. And if we do nothing, in the next 30 years, right in our very highs, we're going to be dealing with about a population of about 1.1 billion. I mean, you're going to deal with it because you're still going to be there. So the most important thing right now for us is we got to get started. What you're doing, what are you doing? So when I started my company, I was 23. And everybody just said, come on, this guy is just too young. But I was making sense. I worked, I lost my parents at the age of 10, and I grew up in a village. I mean, if you all know the typical African village in the Niger Delta, we had no water, no electricity, there were no roads to connect the major cities, and I was just a village boy. And but I said to myself that the story of my late mom saying to me that if I die, my children are going to suffer, kept on ringing in my head. And that made me to realize that, listen, you cannot go the way of your parents. And I worked so hard, and I said to myself, and at 22, I said, listen, I think I want to start my own business. I didn't have any sense of direction, I didn't have any mentor, but I had that resonating in my heart that, listen, I need to change the narrative and make my late parents proud. And when I started the company, I was putting stuff together, irrespective of the fact that the environment was very difficult, it was very tough. I took the bull by the neck, by its neck, and today I said to myself that, listen, there are a whole lot of young boys and young girls out there still going through what you went through. So what are you going to do for them? And I took up that major challenge by ensuring that I provide a lot of jobs for these young boys and young girls. And a lot of them I provide scholarship. And last year we awarded over 500 scholarships last year. And this year we've done over 300 scholarships. And we have a lot of our girls in London, in Ghana, in Canada, in Cyprus, and all over the world, in Nigeria. And a lot of them, when they get back, they give us good testimonies. And what I did was to ensure that the entry mechanism isn't too stringent. And a lot of them say, why you just give this scholarship? You make it look so easy. And I said to my heart, these guys, they ain't understanding where I'm coming from. You make scholarships so difficult, so if you don't have no contacts or connection, you gotta have top-notch brain, otherwise you can't get it. I said no. And we also have employed over 3,000 of those local boys. You wouldn't believe it that a lot of the young guys that I had with me during my primary school days are still struggling till today. And I said, what can I do? I went outside the box to ensure that we create about 3,000 employment for these local guys. And what I found out after those employments were given to those guys, that they were able to help others. But then I said to myself that as corporate, I can't just do that alone. You need a policymaker to support that scheme, because then you're going to be dealing with the whole country. So if private can have support through collaboration with the government, building the right ecosystem, but again, taking this opportunity to the rural area is the most important thing, because then you're going to be managing your rural area, rural-urban, migration. Because a lot of the challenges that we face today that our African young boys are getting drowned in the Mediterranean is a contact they made with the urban area. And they say, listen, I have greener patches, I have the contact, I have the connection, I can take you out of this country, you're going to have a better job. So if we can have the right ecosystem where you have a government being part of the entire course, the private sector will go a long way in helping to reshaping Africa. But one thing I want you all to note as African here, that you're going to be dealing with a population of about 1.8 billion in the next 30 years. And if you do nothing and continue discussing it without action plan that shows a strategy and a pathway to alleviating this challenge that we're facing today, you'll probably be living in America all along, because Africa is waiting for you. So we need to do a lot. Discussing this is important, but the action plan to making sure that the government, policymakers are also persuaded to buy into this great vision to make Africa a better place will go a long way in helping us. Thanks a lot.
Vivian, can I add to that? Great. I completely agree, and just wanted to dovetail that. One of the frustrating pieces of these conversations is we're talking to each other, and it's a bunch of amazing people around the table and in the room that are creating stopgaps for what are really failures of government to provide the infrastructure or the education. And so the issue of getting to scale, as my colleague was saying, will never be cracked unless we actually get at some of those bigger governance issues too. And so it's both really inspiring and also, I think, saddening to see so many great people do things that we can't reach scale unless we've got that underlying ecosystem, as you said. And so one of the pieces, I think, particularly from a Western perspective, is there's a real misunderstanding about what entrepreneurship in Africa is. I think James was getting at this a bit. When we think of entrepreneurship, we think of somebody in a hoodie in a garage with a tech solution that could have done anything but chose to create something that's the next big thing. Not so much hundreds of millions of people trying to hustle just in the informal economy to put food on the table. And you can't do that without the skills. You can't do that without the being equipped to do so. And so as we're looking at these regional surveys of the World Bank and of others, you see enormous exuberance, more in Africa than in other regions, about a belief in being entrepreneurial, but a deficit in skills and people being entrepreneurial in ways that really have limited growth opportunities or scale or expansion opportunities. And so I just wanted to commend you, Mr. Jack Rich, and others who are doing these things, and wholeheartedly agree that the public policy has to be right, the education has to be there, the investments have to be there, if we're really going to be able to provide the millions of jobs needed each year to meet that demographic challenge.
If I could pick up on that. Very specifically, that manifests in very real ways. When we talk about things like ease of doing business in Africa, what governments immediately focus on is, am I putting in the right policies to attract large multinational investment, etc.? And some of that involves things like get the hawkers off the streets and make sure that the city looks nice and neat so that, whereas the reality is what we should be focusing on is how easy is it for informal business to migrate through that journey. And so in a lot of what we're trying to do on the policy side is actually focus on small and informal business and what is it that you need to do to help those people succeed. That's rarely about an incubator or an accelerator. That's for a different kind of business that will launch and grow and be a pillar of your economy. It's about basic business management skills and coordination. It's helping someone learn how to run a tailor shop well. There's no accelerator for tailoring, right? It's just, here is how you think about the basics of running a fairly straightforward business in a particular context. Related to that is something about economic complexity. Like we talk about rural, one of the surprising findings we had was one of the biggest predictors of whether you're going to have a job or not is how many people in your immediate area are doing different things. So if you're a farmer in a place surrounded only by farmers, your chances of not earning a basic livelihood are very, very high. If you've got a lot of different activity around you, firstly, you learn and observe, Kennedy, to your point, here's how I might enter this space or that space. Secondly, there's many opportunities that feed off each other. And so if we're thinking about things we can do at scale, which is not, we often think in the thousands or tens of thousands, we're going to need a systemic shift. It's about how do we build complexity, so a range of different activities in rural areas and elsewhere, and how do we get out of our own way, get out of the small hustlers' way, figure out how you protect and support them, because let's face it, Africa is going to have to grow as a hustler economy. It's not going to be MNCs hiring everyone into formal employment. It's just not going to happen.
Those are good points that both Grant and James you've raised. So I just have a question for either of you, whoever wants to take it. How do you crack the government to be able to have the right policies to grow the kind of economy that you're talking about?
So, well, the good news is I think most governments realize, and Jake, I'd love your view as well, there's one of those things that if you're not doing right, you're out of business quite quickly these days. And so they're trying to do the right thing in many cases. Some are not. I think it's really digging beyond intention. So you'll see governments announcing a whole range of things that they think will lead to employment. We're not actually asking the question, what is working at scale? We say, let's scale what works. We don't say, let's figure out what's working at scale and build off of that, right? So how do we flip our thinking? So for example, we very quickly say, let's create a special economic zone. Actually, what if we mapped all of the mobile telephone transactions in a country and said, which places are showing faster growth? Let's focus there and see what's happening and how do we get more young people into those spaces. So something about what we're finding is once you can give people the data and the tools to make the right decisions, a lot of them want to make the right calls, but we need to move away from like some orthodoxy that says these are the 3 or 4 things you always do, and actually say, let's scale what works, let's steer into what's working, and let's again tap into the energy of our young people instead of saying, let's instruct them on which direction to go into.
I want to comment on that as well. I think one thing that we always forget is that government, a lot of time, are sitting at a very high level, and we who are working at the grassroots have a different perspective. In our work, for example, we work with young women social entrepreneurs, and we did a baseline study to realize that there's no formal registration for social entrepreneurs in Kenya, for example. You have to register as a business or as a CBO, a community-based organization, which means the government then cannot respond to these entrepreneurs' needs. So what we have done is already start having conversations with governments and say, hey, this is how the context has changed, and this is how we can work together to help address them. So we're doing a lot of advocacy around getting the government to have even a social entrepreneurship registration, for example, policy, so they can then address these issues. The second thing for us we realized is we have to get young people to the table because they are the ones who are interacting with the context on a regular basis. They're the ones who understand the challenges. And again, in our country, for example, the government has a 30% procurement quota for young people and women. However, a lot of the young people don't even know, for example, how to do a business plan and even submit this so they can get that procurement. So by getting young people to the table and interacting with the government, then they can change some of the regulations to be able to respond to the young people's needs, and then we can move the needle forward. So just having that space for dialogue I think is really important. And sometimes we think governments know everything, but the context is shifting so fast that we have to be sure that we drive these conversations. Yeah.
Perhaps, if I can just make a point to add on to that. I think sometimes we talk a lot about policy uncertainty or lack of policies, but in some of the African countries, the policies are there. the issue that we have is capacity within our own institutions to implement those policies in a manner that is effective and that drives the objectives that we want. So if I take South Africa, for example, we've got a whole lot of policies. Our own regulatory frameworks, though, and procurement frameworks don't allow for people to enter the system. So we talk about an energy policy that needs to shift towards a greener economy. There's plenty of opportunity for young people to get involved there and create jobs. But the way in which we're implementing that policy doesn't allow for that. So you've got a lot of investors who are queuing up saying, look, we can come and provide the funding and the platform for you to shift, but your own government doesn't know how to enable for that to happen.
May I add to that too, since I was, you posed that. I completely agree with the comments, and I don't want to sound more pessimistic. I am very hopeful, but I agree. It's not the lack of policies on the book. You do need to have voice for youth, but I think fundamentally there's a good governance issue that just has to occur. Governments have to internalize that youth not only need to be at the table, but that there needs to be a transparent and inclusive process, a competitive process for ideas, for political parties, for everything across the board, so that the best rises to the top. And unfortunately, in some governments, and my own government's not perfect, and I'm saying this very humbly, but in many governments around the world, people enter government in order to find opportunity and enrichment and access to resources, rather than to serve the public good. And we have to flip those incentives on their heads so that people are rewarded career-wise and otherwise by making those investments, by providing those services, so that metrics are used, so that there is a race to the top. And governments need to understand, if you ice out youth, if you entrench your own political party, if you don't give voice, it will lead to a lot of disaffected youth and a lack of opportunity.
Let me just answer that.
So just before you answer, let me say one thing. So I know there are a couple hands up. I'm just going to have people around the table to share their contributions, and then I'll come to you straight.
Thank you. I think there is one fundamental need that we need to recognize. What Africa is lacking today is a display of leadership. And leadership is not all about someone who is a governor, or the president, or the regional leader, or women, or your leader. It's the ability to take risk in what you strongly believe in and ensuring that it is done. Sometimes you got to believe in the power and the knowledge within you. And then you need to exercise that. And then having the vision is not enough. Having a master plan is not enough. But we need to display leadership. And that leadership must be designed to ensure that the necessary values for the well-being of the nation is also established. You cannot do without trade. You cannot deal without developing the right technology. You cannot deal without having the right infrastructure. You also cannot deal without, understanding the various stakeholder sensitivities and how to ensure that those sensitivities create the right economic framework. You must have a stable regulatory process. You must have this. You must have a sound, world-class, security mechanism where investor comes in and goes out freely. And for me, that boils down to building the right ecosystem. Because when you have the right ecosystem, you're able to draw in from there. You are able to take advantage of your respective skills and knowledges and all the stuff. So I think leadership is key here. And if we are able to have the right leadership in place, I believe it's going to go a long way in getting out the best of African youth. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Vivian, I wanted to add something very important. I think the biggest obstacle we have in Africa for the young people is the political class. And I'll say it again, political class. Why? Please forgive me. As someone who grew up in a slum informal settlement, if you tell a political leader in Africa most of the time that you want to give opportunity for young people, and I remember very well, they are coming to looking for vulnerable young people to help them on their campaigns, to help them fight each other. So we have to find other narrative to tell them on how to improve the life of the youth. Otherwise, it's not making sense. This is my message to the political class in Africa. You are using the young, angry youth for your political interest. But now, it's becoming bigger than that. If you don't solve it now, Look what is happening in South Africa. Look what's happening in our countries. And right now, you can see bad things happen during election time. I don't think because of that, that's the time they are feeling to express their anger. So it's a high time now to see this thing will make you being able to govern. I think that's the message. You just tell them, like, we are creating jobs for young people. They are like, I don't want them to have jobs. I need them to work for me. So I'm talking about my practical experience that I had in my country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. I think what you're talking about is young people need decent lives, right? And for the longest, we've been taken advantage of. And now we're seeing a group, not a group, but really a mass of young people who are very conscious, who are very aware, and they're trying to hold their governments accountable. And I think that's how we are having the protest, whatever is happening in South Africa and what you've seen across different other countries during the election time, because that's the opportunity that they feel like their voices can be heard. I'll go to Andrew. So I have a question for you. So what are you doing right when it comes to creating opportunities for young people, and what are you failing at that you think that we can help you at? Thank you.
I mean, a really, really interesting discussion. And I know a lot of people around the table, and obviously we work very closely with some of you, and tremendous work that Shofco and others are doing. So I think, firstly, on the company point, I will answer your question, certainly the first part, not the second, but I'll answer the first part. On the company point, I think there are three buckets, really, the way companies like ours are involved. Firstly, there's charitable donations, which are significant, although have to be done in the right way, but they are a significant amount of money and capital, and we're doing a lot, obviously, in South Africa with Vodacom, etc. Secondly, there's a sort of zero-rated in-kind benefit, which for us is zero-rated connectivity, which is a very powerful tool, which again is not charitable, but is in-kind donation and can be significant. There's then the third, where you're bringing social products to market. So the best one for us is M-Pesa, which is truly transformational, has been a massive success, not only for Safaricom, but also in terms of bringing people out of poverty, providing access to finance and services, etc. So that's the sort of context in we operate. When you say, what are we doing right? We looked at this and we did a piece of research, because we want to be led by the research and the data. We did a piece of research with MIT and with that fabulous organization, Girl Effect, to look at particular girls' access to mobile and connectivity. If you have access to connectivity, you have access to any piece of the written word that's ever been written. It's a revolution that's taking place in education and will be truly transformational. But we wanted to know, what is the impact in particular on girls? Are we seeing the same amount of access to connectivity amongst girls as we're seeing amongst boys, because we consider that to be critical for their education, for their employment opportunities, for their access to things like M-Pesa and so on. And girls are getting left behind. Boys are 1.5 times more likely to own access to a mobile device than girls. And so what are we trying to do that's focused, that's delivering? So we've committed with Girl Effect that we'll bring 7 million girls into network access in the next 5 years. We put $5 million into it. Girl Effect are putting $20 million into it through other partners, really giving them access to mobile, which we believe will transform their lives. I'll just tell you one story of a girl I met, just sort of, what does that mean? So I met a girl in one of the markets recently who had no access to mobile, but was learning to read and write via one of our programs. And I asked her, why did she want to learn to read and write? She said she wanted to learn to read the Quran. And then I said, she paused and she said, I'd like to learn to read and write because I don't have access I want my children to have access to education like I didn't have. Absolutely critical. And then she paused, and although culturally we're a million miles apart, I knew she was checking me out as to whether she could trust me. So I just sat in silence and thought she wants to say something. And she said, I also would like to have access to education because I don't have a mobile phone, but my husband has a mobile phone, and I want to read the text on his mobile phone. So that's what it means, you know?
Thank you so much, Andrew. And the last question, we're going to take a pass for now, right? We'll come back.
Yeah, I'll pass on that for them.
Okay, to the audience. So first question there. So you have exactly 2 minutes.
Okay. My name is Ndidi Muneli. I'm the founder of Leap Africa. And just 2 comments. First, I think that it's really important we consider local and state governments. We focus so much on federal governments. LEAP has been working for 17 years. We now work in 6 African countries. And what we've shown is that you can work with state governments, train teachers to deliver curriculum that has massive impacts around life skills and learning skills. I think the focus on federal governments often gets us lost in a quagmire, and we don't see immediate impact. And so LEAP is one example. The second is I think that SMEs have a huge role to play. And through some of the work I'm doing in ag and food, we've just launched something called nourishingafrica.com. And what we're doing is connecting all the SME entrepreneurs across Africa working in agriculture. This is, for me, a silver bullet to creating youth jobs for youth. Agriculture, food processing, logistics, financial services, digital innovation, all across the value chain. And I think we need to focus more, and I didn't hear a lot of talk on what we're doing to create jobs in ag. And there's so many great innovators and entrepreneurs and youth getting involved in digital and ag tech who can really spur this. And I think a lot more actors need to take this seriously. And through my work at Sahel Capital, Sahel Consulting, and Ace Foods, we're seeing what we can achieve if we get young people excited about agriculture and young people engaged, because it creates massive employment. So those are just 2 quick comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Didi. Can you just go around and then you'll take it?
Okay.
Okay. This side.
Let's just take her example, okay? If you go to Africa today with a new technology for agriculture, you will meet the farmer who has been trained by the global chemical and seed companies to charge you to try your technology. The price for getting 1,000 farmers to try your technology is $700,000. So that's a business opportunity. You could create a Pan-Africa organization that could go to the governments and say, I can introduce technology all over Africa to the farmers by bypassing that insanity and showing that you can get the farmers to do stuff that's good for them without them charging you $700,000. In South Africa, there are 1,000 business executives who are going to individual schools across the country working with the principals to turn around those schools. Imagine the impact that's going to have. They're going to do 1,000 more of those partnerships in the next year. Those will all create jobs, opportunities, community development. We don't have any idea the stuff that you're really good at, and we don't know what you're really bad at. You need to figure out what's not working, build the companies, build the social enterprises, build the networks to go fix those things. If getting technology to the farmers is what you're bad at, build a business around it, scale it, get it at scale, as Grant said. That can scale across the entire continent. You don't need any policy changes, and then you can go get the policies changed.
Okay. Thank you. So at the back, the guy at the back.
Hello, everyone.
1.5 minutes.
Okay. My name is Obinna Okane. I am the founder of Naija Made. It is a lifestyle brand that is helping young Nigerian entrepreneurs and professionals create the life that they want to live around the world. Now, the key word is around the world. Now, we are focusing on Nigerians in the diaspora as well as Nigerians on ground. My main question is to find out, based on the different initiatives that you are working with currently, how are you involving the diaspora in your conversations, and how are you creating value for these entrepreneurs and professionals to see the value within themselves?
Thank you so much. That's a really good question. And I'll get Jake to take it, and then you can follow up. Yeah. Yes, please.
So your question was how we're involving the diaspora in our conversation, how we get entrepreneurs to see value, their value? Yes. Yeah, okay. So I will take that. Well, I'm doing it for Ghana, so I give Ghana as an example of what's happening. Getting the diaspora involved in the conversation, especially young people, it was one of the critical things for one of the critical reasons for my role existing, because as young people who exist in the diaspora, there is this multiple identity thing for Africans, right? Young Africans exist in the diaspora have either dual citizenship or actually foreign citizens. But when I say foreign, I mean foreign to the country that their families hail from. And now, with geopolitics and everything, there's a lot of looking back that young people in the diaspora are doing to the continent. So it's actually our opportunity on the continent now to create those avenues for conversation and for return in a sense, whatever way that looks like for people. And so that conversation is very important, and that's why my office looks at youth engagement in the diaspora as a very important thing. What we do is we work with young professionals at the university level. We found that in Ghana, if you're looking for the critical mass of young Ghanaians abroad, you will find them in universities. Our parents insist on this, so it's kind of a thing you would find, and especially in major cities, in and around those areas, you'll be able to attract a critical mass to have that conversation. So via social media, via conferences that we attend and the ones that we're invited to, we're looking at that conversation. Now, another thing we're also doing is young professionals, because young professionals are really looking for their career trajectories, and a lot of Ghanaian and African young professionals are including the continent in their long-term plans. So looking at ways of showing them what is actually happening on the continent, encouraging them to visit at downtime, because there's the mass exodus to Ghana, especially at Christmas time, but that's party season. No work is really getting done then. But looking at coming at different times, highlighting the times and the events around those times that get people really talking about their career plans and trajectories is another thing my office is looking at doing. And also coming up with a comprehensive diaspora engagement policy. That's something that my office has taken on very critically, and by the end of this year we will have, before the close of the year of return, just so that people know what's happening after Ghana's year of return that has gotten so much global acclaim. So in a sense, that's how we are including the diaspora in the conversation. And in terms of seeing value, it's really about seeing what your local counterparts are doing on the continent. I insist that African young people see the same problems on the continent, but then there's a discrepancy in how we are dealing with it. Young people from the diaspora are coming to the continent, trying to do the work, and then getting discouraged because of the complications in the system that does not work. I have lived in the US and UK and moved to Ghana, and I insist that the system does work, you just don't understand it. And so it's really about connecting those people with their local counterparts and saying getting them to work on these projects together. So that is done through various things we've done in our office. We've had two, so far since this government came into office, we've had two diaspora summits where people actually come and are meeting people on the ground and touring facilities and really learning about what their local counterparts are doing and how they can contribute to that and how they can give it the global scale that their global networks will afford them to do. So that's how we're working on that. Thanks.
So similar to Obina, I actually had my start in media. And I chose media because I felt like that was a way to change perspectives and shift the African narrative. And initially when I started my magazine, Aiba, the idea for me was, okay, I want to change the Western perspective of Africa. I want to show the good things and give a more complete story. But as I've progressed in my career, I've noticed that for me, what has become more important is giving other Africans access to the full African story. As a Nigerian who, Nigerians are known for kind of thinking Africa is Nigeria, and it's just, we're focused on, one country. I think it's important to know that there's opportunity all across Africa. And so what I've done with the magazine is to try and tell that story broadly and bring the diaspora into the conversation. So you know that you could move back to your native country where your parents are from, but there's also opportunity all across the continent. And I think that's a really important conversation to have about having people from different African countries see the business opportunity all around the continent and not just in the country where they hail from. And so I've transitioned from just creating stories and just creating content around the African narrative to actually bringing my readers to visit the continent. So I do a girls trip because most of the readers of my magazine are women. So it's called Girls Trip Tours, and we go to a specific African country. And while we're there, we're networking with local business leaders, we're mentoring young girls, and we're transferring those knowledge and skills that exist where we're from and what's lacking on the ground. But I make sure that it's a conversation. It's not just about us saying, oh, we're from America or from the UK, we know more, and so let us teach you. But it's a conversation both ways, because there's so much to be learned from African entrepreneurs operating locally who are literally doing the impossible every day. And so I think it's important to have those opportunities to create experiences where Africans abroad can, in a very comfortable and familiar way, network with local Africans and together create strategy. So just like Jake was saying, it's not just about, doing things randomly, but we have to start strategizing, not just all around the continent, but including the diaspora in that strategy of how we build up the next generation.
Thank you so much, Temi. Eddie?
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that point around diaspora, and there is a shift that I find very refreshing that's taking hold now in terms of people's perception about the products of Africa. Particularly, want to draw attention to kind of the soft power, African soft power through culture, arts, music, sport. There are increasingly greater representatives of the continent serving as ambassadors for what's happening around the continent. You look at the World Cup winning team of France and the number of African extracted players on that team who identify both as African and French. So there is an interesting opportunity. You look at Lion King, this new play that's come out, and the soundtrack, Beyonce, leading African American or people who are parts of the diaspora, engaging with the diaspora in a meaningful way to put Africa on the global map, to give African artists and entrepreneurs equal footing on the global stage is a really interesting opportunity. So being more open and receptive to connecting people through those networks that facilitate young artists and entrepreneurs around the continent success is important.
I'll maybe add two quick things. One, it's been surprising that some African leaders are actually starting to pay attention to something I never thought I'd see, the power of the creative industry as a big economic driver. So recognizing that we should play to areas of strength where our young people actually are in labor-intensive areas of opportunity and start unlocking opportunities there. And you're seeing some governments do it, but not enough. And it also does demand a cultural shift so that you don't have that many parents saying, I will disown you if you do not finish your accounting degree to go record an album. Or become a fashion designer or whatever. But the second observation is Africa is going to have to do something that's actually unprecedented in economic history. We're not going to be able, like Asia, to export our way to economic prosperity because global trade and automation mean that we're not going to use European, American, or even Asian markets as a leapfrog. Instead, almost the only realistic path to high productivity growth in Africa is trading amongst ourselves. But we need to take that seriously, right? And that means that the fact that actually the easiest group of people of African descent for me to hire in any African office are those who carry UK or US passports, because it's so hard to hire an African from another country or to travel as an African between African countries is the biggest scandal underpinning any thinking around Pan-Africanism. Some countries are starting to wake up to that, but as long as we raise those bars higher for our own people and lower for others, we are on the wrong track and we are not walking the talk.
All right. To Ndidi's question around or comments on state collaboration and the other point that she made, we found at TipHub, we find that a lot of the organizations, a lot of the companies that we work with see a lot more success on the state level as well. State leaders are more accessible, therefore more accountable. And so there's a lot of movement from special projects around education to healthcare initiatives. It is literally a organization hack to work with local and state governments. So I definitely second that. And then on the second point on creating kind of this creating a platform for agricultural technologists to collaborate. I think this is a bigger trend that follows kind of the realities of building ecosystems in Africa. A lot of founders or a lot of organizations find themselves building their whole value chain, and it's expensive, right? But the value that you get from creating a platform to bring people together, and then from there giving them funding to now create their own thing collectively, and then going on and getting market entry, all of that is significantly important. And you find that that's one of the biggest challenges. One of the biggest challenges we find with a lot of companies we work with is that they're in that kind of same struggle where they have to build their own value chain. A lot of larger companies are thinking about how do we lead by data, but reality, there's no data. So now, one of the first things you have to do as a startup is you have to become a data company, right? And then you have to build, now you have your inferences, or now you have your research, and then now you have to build your market, and then now you have to build your logistics. Now you have to build, so you have to think about the different parts of the value chain you really want to play in, and other areas where you can partner. And I think they're and that's just not a private sector thing, that's collectively. So that's all I had for that. And then lastly, on the diaspora side for TipHub, we believe the diaspora is one of the key underpinnings of what we do for our work. On the straight shooting side, diasporans will, for the fund, for our next fund coming up, diasporans will account for 90% of the of the limited partners. So about 90% of the funds going into that fund will be from diasporans all across the continent. And we believe that that's going to be a very strong demonstration of how diasporans want to get involved, not just in, and it's not just in, coming every December for the holidays and buying, and doing the holidays, but actually be part of building, investing in solutions and seeing the upside. And then the second thing that we've done with diasporans specifically is we've created a small network of mentors and advisors. What you'll find, especially in your San Francisco, New York, Chicago, UK, there are just so many exceptionally high senior managers that are of diaspora descent, and they're looking for ways to give back. And so we've created a community of mentors and advisors that work with companies that we've invested in and that have gone through our programs. And we find that skill share is not just beneficial for the company, but it's also beneficial for the advisor and the mentor, because they're in the back of their mind, 70% of the time, they're thinking about how they're going to build a business on the continent as well.
Mine is really, I always struggle with, Africans, we have brilliant ideas. I mean, just sitting here and listening, and I'm thinking, so what next? And I asked you this earlier, Viviana, because we are full of ideas. We will come together in a round table, we will talk, and then tomorrow we go back to our daily life. So I've learned so much, you've learned so much, but how do we push this? Because it is a crisis. Youth employment, youth empowerment, it is a crisis. We are seeing it, but no one is taking the leadership that we are talking about. No one is willing to fund that space. No one is willing to be, no one is, so we all have these ideas, but how do we move from the talk to connecting? How do we come from my silo of me, I'm doing great ideas, Noella is doing great ideas, Shofko have great ideas. How do we create the learning space and the sharing space and the ecosystem to really move our countries to the next level? How would we get that collective voice? Because this is something we can't do alone. And this is just throwing it to everyone to really move from, I mean, the audience have great ideas. What's the next?
Okay, Jack Rich. So basically, I will just let you know my action plan. It's what I've been doing. It's very important. It's not enough to discuss this. You got to come up with a strategic action plan that is sustainable also. 1 minute. Okay, so my company, just we launched a project where we are expanding our field. And the most important reason for doing that, to making sure we take care of 3 important things. 1, clean environment. 2, create jobs. 3, make my money. Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing that right now, and my country. I want to thank the president of my country, President Muhammadu Buhari, who just approved an export terminal for us. So we're going to be building a pipeline. We're going to do a great job. We're going to build new infrastructure to expand the field, to utilize our flare gas, to produce other commodifiable goods. We're going to do a great job. And the most important thing also is making sure that you all who are here get access to policymakers to ensure that they introduce policies and then enact laws that help private sector participate. Agriculture is number 1. Agriculture is about $1.5 trillion in business. And if we have a buying power with about 1.316 billion population of Africa, that's over, if you have $3.23 as a buying power for every African, that's $1.5 trillion. And the growth rate is about 3%. So for me, agriculture is key. But to enhance agriculture, we need infrastructure. Access to the rural area where you can transport your goods, because 65% of agricultural produce is gone wasted because the farmers don't have access to infrastructure. Infrastructure, technology, access to liquid capital from the world most developed corridor where we are will go a long way in helping to create employment for African youth. Thank you.
And I do think we talk about a lot of agriculture, but coming from a mining country, it's very important to give how we're going to transform the minerals more on the continent and give jobs. Because like Congo or different countries, there's so many mineral resources, but where the money is going, we don't see any infrastructures. We see more than 600 million people still don't have access to electricity or water. And there are big things where we can see minerals transforming a continent and having trade between the countries in the continent, but not seeing the minerals extracting and where we see all the technology being used are coming from the continent. So that's something that we need to push definitely the leadership, the government, to see transparency in the selling of these minerals and how we can really serve the population.
Okay, thank you, sir. Lola, 1 minute, Jerry, 1 minute. And we'll have a contribution from Mr. Collins.
Yeah, just to piggyback on 2 points that Noella said, and one, when we extract these resources, we have to do it sustainably. I think all of the natural resources that Africa has cannot be sustainably taken out of the ground, and I think we have to come to that conclusion. So we have to find different ways to find opportunities for youth unemployment. But I think the partnerships happen in forums like this. There was a conversation in London about youth entrepreneurship that Concordia held, and we had Ismail Reddy of World Remit. And if you know World Remit, it's about sending money back to your home country. And he said that actually the World Bank and the IFC had to refine their data because they were direct service providers. So it was about 70% less they were calculating remittances were a huge part of African economies. But I think also, as coming from an investor lens, we have to not really focus on international investors, but as Chika said, really focusing on diaspora and the local wealthy. Because if entrepreneurs or African entrepreneurs come to the fund that I work with, one, they're not ready for funding, they're not scalable, and they're not in the purview of what we fund. So another thing, sorry. It's just really about narrative. So a couple of months ago, Blackstone had this big thing where they were leaving the African continent and saying that, we're leaving and we're not investing anymore. And that does more damage for the continent in investing than any local impact investor can have. And I think we really have to work collectively to ensure that narratives like that don't shape the continent. Because if a $500 billion fund can't find opportunity, what's to say a small SME fund will?
Yeah, so I'll lead with his comment on narratives. So we work with young women to help them tell their own stories so they can amplify their own stories, because when you have that visibility, then you get people to invest in you. And then the second thing I want to say is movement building. we are in these spaces. Sometimes you outgrow an investor, you outgrow a partner, open the door for the other person. In fact, the anecdote that we use is send down the elevator, which is really, really critical, especially for Africans. So we need to be able to build that movement and continuously send down the elevator to other investors. And then the last thing is, let's just recognize that African youth are not homogeneous. So when we are, like in Congo, you could be talking about mining. In other countries, you could be talking about agriculture. In Kenya, you could be talking about social entrepreneurship. So having that mindset that not all young African young people are the same, and ensuring that we are investing in them as their individuals, and also recognizing that they have agency, so they can make decisions and they can change the continent. We just need to provide them with the right investments.
Thank you so much. You kept to the 1 minute. And now we'll, Mr. Cummings. So Mr. Cummings was an executive at Coca-Cola, and right now he's the founder and head of Cummings Investment Group, apart from being a politician too. But he's worked a lot with young entrepreneurs across the continent, and I think one of your key areas is creating employment for young people. So we'd like to hear what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what do you think the private sector needs to do, and how do you mobilize that in 1.5 minutes?
Thank you. Let me first of all say the challenge is very complicated. There are no silver bullets, meaning there'll have to be many interventions to solve this issue. I like the database approach of the Dalberg Group, looking at the data, looking at the facts, looking at scaling things that are already working as opposed to trying to create new things. Because it's important that you focus on those things that are organic, that people themselves are already doing, as opposed to creating something artificial or forcing it. So if it's organic, if it's happening, then of course you want to reinforce it, strengthen it, grow it, scale it, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a key way to solve this issue. I also think we shouldn't wait for governments. Yes, they need to create environment, need to create the policy frameworks, and we should push them to do so. But I think as individuals, as groups, we should just get on with trying to solve this problem. Again, it's multifaceted, it's complicated, and we'll need many, many interventions to make it work. From my side, personally, I invest in ideas and in people. If the idea makes sense and the individual or individuals make sense, chances are they'll figure it out. The plan or roadmap to put in place may not be exactly as it pans out, but if you got the right individuals and you got the right idea, typically it'll work. And so I enjoy mentoring. I enjoy dealing with people. I like to see people successful, take some risk. And so we do that extensively across the country, individuals and with small enterprises. So Vivian, thanks for the opportunity to comment. Hopefully I did that in 90 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're about to start running out of time. I'll take one question, and then we'll just wrap up as a panel. 15 seconds, please.
15 seconds?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elo Ume from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm a founder of an enterprise software business, 10 years old. Piggybacking on a lot of the comments, very brilliant comments, I think that in our 10 years, we've learned a lot of lessons. And a big part of that is value chains are part of it. And those value chains morph into ecosystems. We were solving a particular problem in mobile. But to solve the problem in mobile, we need to build software. To build software, we need to educate the people that will build the software. They don't come fresh out of school. And what you do is that it becomes very competitive, and they start to get exported to other parts of the world. So as a business, how do you sustain that? That's the strategy question. But to the heart of the issue, which is youth employment and entrepreneurship, the two of them link, right? Because the more people you have in gainful employment, the chances of having brilliant entrepreneurs from the right ecosystems and the right value chains are increased, and the chances of them scaling businesses, because what we're dealing with is going to be a private sector-led solution, not a public sector one. So it is, I think that how do we sensitize the local ecosystems of capital and the international ecosystems of capital to view the Africa problem with a different eye. I think that that is at the heart of the issue. And that different eye is not a social eye. It needs to be a capital-making, a money-making, solid entrepreneurial, which is Africa-grown, to see the Africa opportunity with a different eyes. How do we do that sensitization? I think that should be at the heart of the discussion. Thank you.
Who wants to take it? Okay, just a minute. So we're about to wrap up, and Chika, you're going to take the question during the wrap-up. I wish you could take many more questions, but we're running out of time, and our panelists are going to be around so you can continue interacting, exchanging numbers, forge partnerships, and whatnot. So my last question to each one of you, and it's 15 seconds. What is the one thing that you're going to do from here to create employment opportunities and support young entrepreneurs in your various sectors? So we'll start with you, Grant, because you're looking at me.
The one thing that I've been focused on is helping accelerators and incubators think about how the policy and the political issues affect an entrepreneur's ability to reach scale. Because oftentimes there can be a great solution, but it'll either run into a regulatory issue or corruption or other challenge, or they need the government to do something, buy something, source something, budget for something. And so one thing that I want to seek partnerships here to do and keep talking about is how to bring many different types of advisors and skill sets to support entrepreneurs to bring these solutions to scale. Thank you.
First of all, this matters. We teach them to make uniforms and bags. So we give them a lot of jobs. They make these little bags, and they're making accessories, iPads, and etc. And we really want to launch the program we already started about the youth with the vocational training. That's very key because they've never been to school in rural villages and how they can come in the workforce.
Yeah. So Andrew and I, we are planning to do something together. So that'll be really important. Yeah.
Something together
for the youth.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Now I am so curious.
Have we discussed this?
I'm going to follow them around. I think the key thing is work on building open source or accessible platforms. So bring together partners to create scaling platforms of different kinds, whether these are technology-based or access to funding-based, etc., that allow people not to have to figure out every single aspect of solving a problem and just focus on one piece. So just being a part of that stack. Kenya, I'd love to have a conversation about the funding question. There's a few others, and for that, Andrew would love to have a conversation about... No, it's a specific thing that you didn't mention, data partnerships. Yeah. How is it that we actually use the large amounts of private sector data that's out there to better understand what's going on with African populations and use it as a public good to enable other interventions and other solutions to be developed?
Thank you. I like that we're already having the partnerships going on. So Kenya, your question is sort of being answered.
Yeah, at Yale, I'm fortunate to work on something called the Yale Young African Scholars Program. It's a college access pipeline program run on the continent in partnership with Strive Masiyiwa and Tsitsi Masiyiwa through the Higher Life Foundation. It's brought 40 students from 44 countries, financially excluded high school students from across Africa, to figure out the soup to nuts on how to get into a university on the continent, in Europe, Asia, and the US. And we need more partners because we're identifying tremendous talent. Akili Dada is one of our network partners, and we want to figure out how best to place these students so they're well positioned for careers.
Fantastic. I actually participated in that program this year in Kenya, and I can attest to that the kids are very brilliant.
So something I started doing this year was actually putting my money where my mouth is when it comes to believing in Africa. So I invested in a local Nigerian company called Gig Girl, which is Africa's first data science academy for women. And I know a lot of diasporans believe you have to move back to the continent to work there, but you can also partner, empower, support local businesses with not just finances, but your time, resources, and the partnerships that you have access to just by living in the diaspora. And so that's what I've been doing with Gig Girl, and I'm also encouraging people in my network to do the same and try and create those relationships so they can find the right business fits for them.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, what I'm going to do as soon as I get back home is to further double check with what my guys are doing. This year, I decided to knock off the guy who works in my finance department and ensure that he runs a special unit called Building Strategic Stakeholder Economic Development. So I'm going to double check with what you're doing there and then ensure that I further reinforce it. But the most important thing is that for us to succeed in this business of helping African youth, we got to make sure that we build the right ecosystem to ensure that the government guys are part of it. The policymaker position is very important. Entrepreneurs and the government, the risk capital ventures, and all those guys need to be part of a system to, ensuring that Africa grow. Youths are very important. We have to get to work. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is what I've already been doing. First of all, making sure that in a society that tends to be quite ageist, advocating for young African businesses at any point. If there's anyone we need to hire, I make sure it's a young person. And if there's any business that needs to provide any service, I make sure it's a young person, young African person, just so that they're also getting traction for their businesses. And on a more formal level, I think continuing to foster that kind of collaboration between diaspora entrepreneurs and local ones and also following up on that, really putting the office's muscle behind recommendations that we make so that these partnerships are forged.
So mine is simple. It's fundraising and fundraising so that African young women can be able to access resources to scale their businesses. So if you have a pot of money out there and are looking to invest in a young African woman, please speak to me.
We all need money. That was exactly 15 seconds. Luanda.
I think mine is really about bridging the gap between the funder and the people who need funding. I think there needs to be a conversation, at least for where I stand, about what it is that investors are looking for and what it is that the people who run the businesses have to offer and where the gap is.
I hate to be the doctor of doom, but really just drumming the beat on climate change. Lagos is drowning, Cape Town is running out of water. So really what we've been doing is, in every investment that we have, ensuring that companies don't have an adverse impact in the climate. And in my personal time, making sure that young Africans can participate in the new green economy.
I think for us it's SDG 5. So firstly, bringing 7 million girls into the network, getting access to informal learning with Girl Effect. And then secondly, as a company, producing products and services that enable 50 million additional women to have access to connectivity by 2025.
So, Andrew, I have a lot of girls. I have 500 girls. So hopefully between us, we'll get you. We can get many girls to you and Shofko. And what I've been working on, and I think is so critical, is really this career counseling, and just because we work in a very rural place, and the only thing that people know there to be a job is a teacher or a nurse. And there's lack of technology and just that creativity space, and I think that's been really, really key for me. And so if you're in Kenya, I have to link you to a girl in my school to be able to, because it's mentorship. It's really seeing what is not around you. So that's been very, very helpful for us. And just, job readiness, how to write your personal CVs. And it's a lot of things that goes into that. And I'm looking forward for partnership. Definitely, James, I'll reach out because I want to figure out how to use that data to really inform. Because right now we have like 40 girls that we're working, but I'm thinking about what about the next 10, the next 1,000 girls, so how do we use that data to really forge us forward? So, yeah, definitely.
So the first thing I'm going to do is buy one of those bags. Are they for sale?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to definitely, that's the first thing I'm going to do. But the second thing that I'll do is we focus a lot of the startups that we work with have training programs in place that are very much focused on working to level up employees. And I think that's something that we've taken for granted as, key unique value proposition for the startups. But I think after having this conversation and also thinking about it a little bit more, it is something that I want to kind of challenge companies to do a little bit more, because that small investment you make into a student's life, a student's life that may not understand how your business works, can yield significant improvements, not just for your business, but for the young child's life as well. So that's something I'm definitely going to take a look at. And then also need to check out Get Girl. Are they in Lagos? Oh, game over. Okay. Okay, I got you. Okay.
So once again, thank you so much. I'm sorry, Chika will answer your question after the panel because we've run completely out of time. I'm sorry about that. So first and foremost, thank you so much to my distinguished panelists for your contributions, your wealth of experience. And I'm glad to see that we're already forging partnerships, because that is what the Concordia platform is for. And again, thank you so much, Concordia, for making this part of the program, because this is the first way to have change is by having conversations and changing knowledge. And I think that's what we did today. So thank you again for being part of it.